The quiet beginning, the world saw them as movie stars. People knew their faces, their films, their laughter, but no one knew the secret kindness that lived quietly behind the lights. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock had shared years of friendship, and yet there was something deeper that connected them, something invisible, something sacred. It all started on a cold winter night in Los Angeles. The city was asleep, but Keanu couldn't rest. He sat by his apartment window, looking down at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. He had just returned from a movie premiere, all smiles and cameras, but his heart felt heavy. He had seen something on his way home. A young woman sitting under a bridge with two children, trying to stay warm under a torn blanket. That image refused to leave his mind. The next morning, Keanu drove back to the same spot. The woman was gone, but her little cardboard sign was still there. It read, "We had a home once." He stood there for a long time, the words burning in his chest. That moment changed something in him. He made a quiet promise to help people who no one else saw, but he didn't want the world to know. He wanted his kindness to stay quiet, pure, untouched by fame. Around the same time, Sandra Bullock was dealing with her own struggle. A devastating storm had hit a small town in Texas, destroying hundreds of homes. One of those homes belonged to her childhood friend. Sandra had sent money, food, and supplies, but she knew it wasn't enough. She wanted to do something lasting, something that would give people dignity, not just aid. A few weeks later, their paths crossed again. It was at a private charity event in New York. Most guests were there for attention, dressed in designer suits, posing for cameras. But Sandra sat quietly in the corner, signing a small check for an anonymous fund that supported families who had lost homes. Keanu noticed her from across the hall. He smiled because he was there for the same reason. After the event, they walked together along the river. It was cold, the kind of night when the air feels honest. Sandra asked softly, "Do you ever feel like all this isn't real?" Keanu nodded. The lights fade, the applause stops, and what's left is who we are when no one's watching. She smiled. And what if that's when kindness begins? That night, a quiet idea was born. Not a foundation, not a public campaign, but a hidden mission between two souls who wanted to make a difference without the world knowing. They agreed on one thing. No names, no cameras, no credit. Over the next few months, they began something small. Sandra found struggling single mothers who needed work. Keanu found mechanics, carpenters, and builders who had lost their jobs. Together, they funded small projects that rebuilt homes, schools, and shelters, all through anonymous donations. One of their first projects was rebuilding a burned-down daycare in New Mexico. They sent money through a quiet channel, using only the code name Project Dawn. When the daycare reopened, the local paper called it a miracle funded by strangers. Keanu and Sandra read the article separately, smiling quietly to themselves. But soon, something unexpected happened. A journalist began investigating the mysterious donors behind Project Dawn. Rumors spread. Some said it was a tech billionaire, others guessed a religious group. No one imagined it was two Hollywood stars who simply wanted to help. The pressure grew. Their anonymous work was suddenly at risk of being exposed. One night, Sandra called Keanu. "What if people find out?" she asked, her voice full of worry. Keanu paused before answering. "Then we stop using names. We keep doing good, but we change the way we give." From that day forward, they used a new symbol for their donations, a simple mark of two hands joined together, one slightly open, one slightly closed. It meant giving and receiving are one act. They called it the quiet circle. As their secret projects grew, they discovered stories that broke their hearts and restored their faith at the same time. A veteran who built bicycles for orphans, a teacher who taught kids under a street lamp, and a nurse who refused to abandon her patients even when her clinic shut down. Each story reminded them why they began. Each act of kindness pulled them deeper into something that no fame or film could ever give. But the world, as always, was watching. Someone had started noticing the pattern. Donations appearing under the same mark, the quiet circle across different cities. A reporter from London wrote an article titled "The Invisible Angels of Hollywood." Neither Keanu nor Sandra spoke about it. They continued their secret mission, moving silently through lives, leaving warmth behind. Yet deep down they both knew, one day their secret might surface. And when that day came, they hoped the world would understand that some kindnesses are meant to stay unseen. As months passed, Sandra found herself visiting a small hospital in Mexico City. The hospital was struggling, its equipment decades old. One child, Lucas, reminded her of the same spark Keanu once had. Quiet strength in pain. She sent an anonymous donation that covered all the hospital's debts. When the hospital reopened with new lights and machines, Lucas wrote a letter that read, "Thank you to whoever cared when no one else did." Sandra sent the letter to Keanu without a word. He replied with a single line, "That's why we started." But fate was not done testing them. A storm of misunderstanding, curiosity, and media attention was coming, and this time, their kindness would face its hardest challenge yet. Whispers in the dark weeks turned into months, and the world began to notice the quiet miracles. A new roof here, a rebuilt school there, medical bills suddenly paid, but no one knew who was behind it. Reporters called it the Quiet Circle movement. Government started investigating. But Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock stayed silent, watching from the shadows as their kindness spread beyond their control. One rainy evening, Keanu sat alone in a dim cafe near downtown Los Angeles. He wore a hoodie and simple jeans, blending in like any other stranger. On the counter was an old newspaper folded open to an article titled "The Mysterious Hands Behind Hope." The article mentioned donations, projects, and the strange symbol of two hands joined together. It was both beautiful and dangerous. The secret was slowly unraveling. His phone buzzed. It was Sandra. Her voice was low but urgent. "Someone is tracing the donations. I think they found the name of our old foundation contact." Keanu exhaled slowly. "Then we move faster. Do more good before they stop us. But what if they twist it?" she whispered. "What if they make it about fame?" "Then we show them," he said quietly. Kindness doesn't need a stage. That night they decided to meet again. Not in a hotel or studio, but in a small church shelter on the edge of the city. It was a quiet place where no one cared about movie stars, only warm meals and second chances. When Sandra arrived, Keanu was already there, helping an old man fix a leaking pipe in the kitchen. She smiled. Even after all the years, his kindness was never an act. It was who he truly was. They sat on two wooden benches, a single candle flickering between them. Outside, thunder rolled like a reminder of how fragile their secret had become. "We can't hide forever," Sandra said. "Someone will eventually find out." Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe that's not the problem. Maybe the problem is, people forgot how to believe in kindness without asking who's behind it." His words stayed with her. A few days later, Sandra received a letter from a small island school in Greece. The letter was written in broken English but filled with gratitude. The head teacher explained how a donation from the Quiet Circle had saved their classrooms from closing. Attached to the letter was a drawing made by the children. Two hands joined together under a golden sun. She showed the letter to Keanu, who smiled faintly. "See? Kindness speaks its own language." But soon the whispers became louder. One morning, a news channel aired a special report linking the Quiet Circle to a Hollywood insider. They showed blurred photos of a woman who resembled Sandra Bullock and a man with Keanu's familiar walk. Within hours, social media exploded with theories. Hashtags trended. Some praised them. Others accused them of using charity for attention. The internet twisted their silence into mystery, and mystery into scandal. For the first time, Sandra felt afraid. She wasn't afraid of losing fame. She was afraid that the people they helped would lose faith in pure kindness. She met Keanu again in a quiet bookstore, one of those rare places where time seemed to move slower. Rain tapped softly against the glass as they sat hidden between shelves. "Maybe we should stop," she said softly. "People are turning it into gossip. They're making it ugly." Keanu looked at her for a long moment, his eyes calm but firm. Then we remind them that good doesn't stop just because people misunderstand it. He reached into his bag and placed a small, hand-carved wooden token on the table. It was the same quiet circle symbol, but this time burned at the edges like it had been through fire. "What's this?" she asked. "Someone left it at the shelter," he said, with a note that said, "You helped me once." "Now it's my turn." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. The kindness had come full circle. Inspired by that message, they began working in a new way. Instead of sending money, they helped others start their own circles of kindness. A former soldier in Canada began rebuilding homes for war widows. A student in Brazil started a scholarship fund. A nurse in India began teaching first aid to children. The movement grew, not with fame, but with faith. But as the light spread, so did the shadows. One morning, Keanu received an envelope without a name. Inside was a photo of him and Sandra leaving the shelter. Written across it were the words, "We know." He stared at the photo for a long time, then folded it and placed it inside his jacket pocket. When he called Sandra, his voice was calm but serious. "They're watching us now," he said. "Who?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "We'll stay true. No matter what happens, the world will see kindness, not chaos." But deep down, both of them knew something had changed. The secret they had protected for years was slipping out of their hands, and soon, a single act of kindness would trigger the biggest storm of their lives, one that would test not only their courage, but their faith in humanity itself. The storm of truth. The world was no longer silent about the quiet circle. What began as small whispers had turned into storms of questions. TV anchors debated, tabloids speculated, and people online argued whether kindness could ever be real without fame attached to it. Keanu Reeves watched all of it from his old apartment window one morning. Outside, the city moved fast. Cars, lights, people chasing time. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. The news channels had begun showing photos of him and Sandra Bullock entering unknown towns, small villages, hospitals, the same places they had helped quietly. Someone had leaked security footage. His phone buzzed with dozens of missed calls. Not from reporters, but from friends, colleagues, and even strangers asking if he really was the invisible donor. He ignored all of them. But when Sandra's number flashed on his screen, he picked up immediately. Her voice was trembling. "They found the children's hospital," she whispered. "The one in Mexico City. Reporters are outside asking for interviews." "Lucas! The little boy I told you about, he's scared." Keanu's jaw tightened. "I'll go there," he said. "No," she replied. "If you show up, it confirms everything." "Then let them confirm it," he said softly. Let them know kindness was real. That night, Keanu boarded a quiet flight to Mexico City under a different name. No cameras, no guards, no announcement. He wore a plain gray jacket and carried only a backpack. Inside it were letters. Real letters from people the quiet circle had helped. He wanted to show them that behind every rumor, there were real lives healed by hope. When he arrived at the hospital, the scene broke his heart. Children were peeking out of windows, nurses trying to keep them calm, while camera lights flashed outside the gate. He walked straight in, unnoticed at first. A nurse recognized him and gasped, "Mr. Reeves!" He shook his head. "Please, just Keanu." He found Lucas sitting near a window, drawing with colored pencils. The little boy looked up and smiled shyly. "Are you the man from the letters?" Keanu knelt down. "Maybe," he said softly. "But the real heroes are you and the doctors who never gave up." Lucas laughed a little. "Mama says good people don't need names." Keanu smiled. That was something Sandra had once said to him. Outside the hospital, cameras began flashing again. Someone had leaked his presence. Reporters shouted his name, crowding the gate. Keanu didn't run. Instead, he walked outside and faced them. Flashes blinded him. Microphones surrounded him. One reporter shouted, "Why did you hide it for so long?" He paused for a moment before answering quietly, "Because kindness isn't a headline." The crowd fell silent for a moment. But the next morning, the internet exploded. Some praised him. Others accused him of faking humility. News anchors argued whether celebrities should stay anonymous or use fame for awareness. Sandra watched it all unfold from her home, her heart heavy. She hadn't spoken publicly yet, but she knew she would have to soon. 2 days later, she received an anonymous message, a short video clip showing her meeting Keanu in the small church shelter months ago. It was clear, undeniable. Someone had been following them for a long time. The message had only one line: "Reveal the truth before we do." She called Keanu immediately. "We're being cornered," she said. "They want a confession." "Then we tell them the truth," he replied. "But not for them. For the people we helped." Together, they planned something unexpected. Instead of a press conference, they decided to appear at a small community event, one that the Quiet Circle had supported secretly years ago, a youth center in Chicago. The center had once been a broken building, full of graffiti and forgotten dreams. Now it was filled with children learning music and art, thanks to anonymous donations that had kept it alive. On the day of the event, the hall was full. Reporters had already gathered outside, waiting for a public statement. Inside, Keanu and Sandra stood side by side on a simple wooden stage. There were no microphones, no bright lights, just the sound of children laughing in the background. Keanu began softly. "We didn't start the Quiet Circle to be seen. We started it because we once saw pain and couldn't walk away." Sandra added, "We never wanted the world to know because the world listens differently when there are no names attached. People trust kindness more when it feels human, not famous." The hall went silent. Even the reporters waiting outside lowered their cameras for a moment, listening. Then Keanu looked at the children and smiled. "The truth is, this wasn't about us. It never was. It was about every person who saw pain and chose to do something, no matter how small." A single mother from the audience stood up. She had been one of the first people helped by their project. Her eyes filled with tears. "You helped us rebuild our home after the fire," she said softly. "You didn't even ask for thanks. My son's drawing of 2 hands. That was for you." Sandra's eyes welled up. "We kept that drawing," she whispered. The crowd began to clap. It wasn't loud. It was gentle, respectful, full of understanding. But just as the applause faded, a man in the back stood up, holding a camera. He shouted, "So you admit it! It was you two all along!" The flashes started again. Chaos returned. Security tried to hold the reporters back, but the noise grew louder. Sandra grabbed Keanu's hand, whispering, "Maybe we shouldn't have come." He looked at her calmly. "No, this is what truth sounds like. Messy, but honest." The next day, headlines around the world read, "Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock confessed to secret global charity." Some mocked them. Others were moved to tears, but deep in the middle of that chaos, something unexpected happened. Thousands of people began donating under the same symbol, 2 joined hands. The Quiet Circle had finally found its voice, and for the first time, Keanu and Sandra realized that their hidden kindness had become something far bigger than themselves, a movement the world couldn't ignore anymore. Yet neither of them knew that. Someone else, the one who leaked their secret, had a different reason for doing it, a reason that would soon break their hearts and change everything again. The betrayal of light, the morning. After the confession, everything changed. What had once been a quiet mission of hope now lived under flashing lights and loud voices. Every news station carried their faces. Every talk show debated their motives. Were they truly kind, or were they simply playing a beautiful lie? Keanu Reeves sat alone in his small kitchen, a cup of cold coffee untouched. The television played softly in the background. "The actors admit to secret charity work," the anchor said. "But new leaks suggest not all the money reached the people." Keanu turned off the screen. His heart sank. The media had found a new story, an accusation. Someone had forged false documents to make it look like part of the Quiet Circle's funds were misused. Within hours, online headlines screamed, "Where did the millions go?" The Quiet Circle exposed. Sandra Bullock received the news while visiting an old orphanage in Louisiana. The children were painting colorful handprints on a wall, red, yellow, blue, tiny pieces of joy. Her phone vibrated endlessly, but she didn't check it until she saw the caretaker's worried face. "They're saying you stole from your own charity," the woman whispered softly. Sandra froze. She could barely breathe. "What?" The caretaker turned the small TV toward her. The screen showed photos of her and Keanu beside words like fraud, cover-up, and betrayal of trust. It felt like the world had turned upside down. That night, Keanu and Sandra met again. Not in a cafe or shelter this time, but in an old studio room they once used to rehearse lines years ago. It was empty now, filled with the echoes of both their past and the heavy silence of the present. "They're twisting everything," Sandra said, pacing. "We gave everything we had, Keanu, everything, and now they're calling us liars." Keanu sat quietly, staring at the floor. "Someone leaked those papers on purpose. Who would do that?" "Someone who knew every detail," he said softly. "Someone close to the projects." He opened his bag and pulled out an envelope, the same kind that had once warned them before. This one had new photos, sharper, clearer. One of them showed their accountant, David, shaking hands with a journalist known for scandal stories. Sandra's face went pale. "No, not David. He helped us start this." Keanu nodded slowly. "He handled the accounts, the transfers, everything. He had access to every record." A long silence filled the room. Sandra's voice broke. "We trusted him." "People break when money speaks louder than conscience," Keanu said quietly. "But kindness doesn't stop because someone betrayed it. For the next few days, everything spiraled. Journalists surrounded their homes. Old colleagues stayed silent. Studios distanced themselves. Keanu's next movie deal was put on hold. Sandra's sponsors withdrew quietly. But none of that hurt as much as seeing the people they'd helped being questioned. Their stories doubted, their dignity stripped. One evening, a message arrived at Sandra's doorstep. It was handwritten, without a name. Inside was a single sentence. "Meet me where the lights first went out." She knew what it meant. The small church shelter and the place where it all began. She called Keanu. "It's him," she said. "David." That night they drove separately, avoiding attention. Rain poured heavily as they reached the old shelter. The door creaked open. Inside, the same flickering candle burned on the same wooden table. And there he was, David, older, tired, and guilty. He looked up as they entered. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. Sandra's voice was calm but trembling. "Why did you do it?" He sighed deeply. "At first I believed in it. I believed in both of you. But when the world didn't notice, when the donations stopped coming, I panicked. I thought if the story became public, more people would donate. I never meant for it to turn into this." Keanu stepped forward. "So you leaked everything?" David nodded, eyes full of regret. "I only wanted people to care. I didn't realize the media would destroy it." Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the roof. Sandra whispered, "You didn't need to make noise for kindness to matter." "I know," David said softly. "And now I've ruined everything." But Keanu shook his head. "No, you didn't ruin kindness. You only reminded us how fragile truth becomes when the world forgets how to listen." They sat in silence for a long time. Then David slid a small folder across the table. Inside were receipts, bank trails, and a confession letter he planned to release to the press. "This clears both of you," he said. "I'll take the blame." Sandra shook her head. "We don't want revenge. We want peace." Keanu placed a hand on David's shoulder. "The world doesn't need another scandal. It needs a lesson. We'll tell the truth, all of it, together." The next day, they arranged a live interview. Not for fame, not for defense, but for clarity. When the cameras started rolling, Keanu spoke first. The quiet circle was never about perfection. It was about trying, failing, and still believing that kindness matters. Sandra added softly, "We made mistakes, yes, but we never stole, never lied. Every act of giving came from love, not pride." Then David stepped into the frame. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. "I leaked the documents. I wanted attention for the cause, but I caused pain instead. The world deserves to know that they are innocent, and that kindness should never be a scandal." The room fell silent. By the end of that night, the truth spread across the world. The same reporters who once accused them now broadcasted their honesty. The public began to see what they had missed. Two people who had chosen humility over headlines, forgiveness over fury. But Keanu and Sandra didn't celebrate. Instead, they met again at the same shelter. No cameras, no speeches. They sat quietly as dawn broke through the windows. Sandra looked at him and said, "The world finally knows. But do you think they'll remember?" Keanu smiled gently. "Maybe not. But the people who felt our kindness, they'll carry it forward. And that's enough." The light of morning touched their faces as the candle burned out. But far away, in a quiet office, another man watched their interview on a laptop, a billionaire philanthropist whose name had never been connected to them before. He paused the video, smiled, and whispered, "It's time they know who started it all." And once again, fate was about to turn their peace into another storm, one that would reveal the greatest secret yet. The hidden benefactor, the air in Los Angeles, felt different after the storm. For weeks, people had argued, cried, defended, and finally forgiven. The quiet circle had survived its darkest trial. But Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock both knew that peace in this world never lasted long. The morning after their public forgiveness, Sandra sat on her porch, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the sun rise. She felt a strange calm, the kind that comes after long storms. Birds were singing again. The world felt lighter, but just as she exhaled, her phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. "Miss Bullock," the voice said, low and calm. "Please don't hang up. My name is Michael Hansen. I represent someone who has been quietly supporting your projects for years." Sandra frowned. "Supporting us? I don't understand. We never took outside help." "You did," the man said softly. "You just never knew it. Check your email in 5 minutes. The line went dead." She opened her laptop, heart pounding. There, in her inbox, was a single message with no subject, only one attachment, a photo. It showed an older man standing beside a rural school, holding a sign with the quiet circle symbol. The two joined hands. The caption below it read, "For every silent act of kindness, there was one before it." Her eyes widened. She knew that face. It was Charles Myers, a billionaire philanthropist known for vanishing from the spotlight years ago. He had quietly built hospitals, funded disaster relief, and then disappeared without ever taking credit. She called Keanu immediately. "You need to see this," she said. When he arrived, she showed him the email. He studied the picture for a long time. "I met him once," Keanu said quietly. "Years ago, during the filming of a small movie in Canada. He came to the set and spoke about kindness like it was oxygen, invisible but necessary. So he's the one who started helping us?" Sandra asked. Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe he saw what we were doing and decided to make it grow." They both sat in silence, realizing the truth. The quiet circle wasn't just theirs. Someone had been behind it all along, expanding their reach, funding projects they never even knew existed. But before they could reach out, Michael Hansen called again. "Mr. Reeves." "Miss Bullock," he said, "Charles is very sick. He's in Zurich. He wants to see you both, before it's too late." 2 days later, they flew quietly to Switzerland, away from cameras and headlines. When they arrived at the hospital, a nurse led them through white hallways that smelled of antiseptic and rain. At the end of the corridor, in a room filled with sunlight, lay Charles Myers. His body was weak, but his eyes were alive, soft and kind, filled with the kind of peace that only comes from a life of giving. He smiled faintly as they entered. "I've been waiting for you." Sandra stepped closer. "You've been helping us all this time?" He nodded slowly. "I saw your first project, the daycare in New Mexico. You reminded me of something I once lost." Keanu sat down beside him. "What did you lose?" Charles looked out the window. "Hope? I used to believe kindness could change the world. But people laughed, mocked, and took advantage. I stopped trying. Then one night, I saw 2 actors rebuilding lives quietly, without fame or attention. I saw humility again, and I decided to help." His voice trembled. "But I didn't just send money. I sent a message to prove that kindness grows when passed forward." Sandra whispered, "You built the network." He smiled weakly. "No, you did. I only gave it wings. For a long time, the room was silent. The three of them sat there, connected by the invisible thread of kindness that had tied their lives together without any of them realizing it. Then Charles turned to Keanu. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. Don't let kindness die when people stop clapping." "Keep it quiet. Keep it human," Keanu nodded. "We will." Charles smiled. "Good. Because the world doesn't need heroes. It needs reminders." He reached under his pillow and pulled out an envelope, placing it in Sandra's hands. "Open this when you leave," he said softly. As they stood to go, his breathing grew slower. The nurse entered quietly, checking his pulse. Sandra turned back one last time and saw Charles's lips move, whispering something she couldn't hear. But Keanu did. He whispered, "Thank you for believing." When they left the hospital, rain began to fall, soft and cleansing. Under the gray sky, Sandra opened the envelope. Inside were papers, deeds, account transfers, and one handwritten letter. It read, "To the quiet circle, the world needs more unseen hands. This fund will now belong to those who give without names. Continue what you started. Continue what humanity forgot." The amount written on the papers made her gasp. Hundreds of millions of dollars. It was enough to change thousands of lives. But at the bottom of the letter, one final line stood out. "And one day, when you meet the child whose smile began it all, you'll understand why I chose you." They didn't know what it meant then, but they soon would. A few months later, they received another letter, sent from a small coastal village in Greece. It was from a teacher named Eleni. She wrote, "A man once visited our island years ago. He built a small library for the children and said it was dedicated to 2 actors who believed in quiet kindness. Now that same library saved lives when the storm came. The children want to thank you." At the bottom was a photo. Children smiling in front of a blue-painted building with a sign above it. "The Quiet Circle Learning Home." Among the children was one little girl holding a handmade card. It read in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for my new books. Mama said you helped even before I was born." Keanu stared at the photo, his eyes filled with wonder. "The child whose smile began it all," Sandra finished softly. "She's the one he meant." They both knew then. The story wasn't over. Charles Myers may have passed on the torch, but the world was waiting for its next chapter of kindness, and that chapter would begin not with them, but with the children who carried their symbol in their hands. Yet as they prepared to visit the Greek island, another letter arrived, this time marked urgent. It was from Michael Hansen again. Something was found in Charles's personal archive, it said, "A video message addressed to both of you. It explains everything." Keanu looked at Sandra, and a quiet chill ran through both of them. The past had given them a mission, but now the truth about how it all began was finally coming to find them. The circle completes. 3 weeks passed before they could bring themselves to open the final message. It sat untouched on Keanu Reeves' kitchen table, a small flash drive sealed in a white envelope with a simple note. "For when you're both ready." Sandra Bullock finally said one morning, "Maybe the truth is meant to be seen now." Keanu nodded. "Then we'll face it together, just like we started." They inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered, and then, slowly, the video began to play. The camera was shaky at first. It showed an older Charles Myers sitting by a window, sunlight pouring gently on his face. His voice was weak but peaceful. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm gone. But I needed you to know something before the world writes its version of the story." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Years ago, before I ever had money or fame, I was a volunteer in a refugee camp after an earthquake in Greece. One night, while we searched for survivors, a woman handed me a baby. She was injured, fading fast, but she whispered, 'She's the future. Protect her kindness.'" His eyes softened. That baby was saved. And when I built my first foundation years later, I named it after her, the child with no known family. I called it the Circle. I swore to build a world that protected quiet kindness. Keanu and Sandra leaned forward, breath held. Charles continued, Decades later, I watched a movie, Speed. Two young actors risked fame for humility, spoke with sincerity, and stayed grounded when the world demanded glamour. I saw in both of you the same light that woman saw in her child. And when you began rebuilding lives in silence, I knew the circle had found its guardians. He smiled faintly. You didn't know me, but I knew you. Every time you helped someone, I funded another project. Every time you stayed silent, I made sure your silence was heard. But the true miracle wasn't the money or the fame. It was what you taught the world without saying a word. His eyes began to tear up. I always believed the woman's child survived. I looked for her, but I never found her. Until last year. Her name is Eleni, Keanu froze. The teacher from Greece. Sandra covered her mouth, whispering, the one who sent the children's photo. Charles nodded slowly in the video. Eleni was that baby. And she, without knowing it, carried forward the same kindness that saved her life. When she rebuilt her village's library, she used the symbol of two joined hands, something she saw in an old diary I left behind. That's how the circle truly became complete. He smiled weakly. So you see, the quiet circle wasn't mine or yours. It belonged to her. It belonged to every person who believed that goodness could travel through generations, unseen but unbroken. Then, his voice grew soft. Thank you, Keanu. Thank you, Sandra, for proving that kindness doesn't fade, it transforms. Keep it alive. Not through fame, not through power, but through faith in people. The video ended. Silence filled the room. Keanu looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. We thought we started it, Sandra nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. But we were only continuing it. That night, neither of them could sleep. The story of Charles Myers, the refugee baby, the teacher, the forgotten mother, played endlessly in their minds. The next morning, they booked 2 tickets to Greece. When they arrived at the coastal village, they found Eleni waiting for them near the small blue library. The sea shimmered behind her, and the same children from the photo ran around laughing. She looked humble, kind, and familiar, as if the circle of kindness itself had taken human form. Eleni smiled as they approached. I knew you would come, she said softly. Keanu shook her hand. We saw your message. And we saw him and Charles. Her eyes filled with tears. He saved me. My mother told me his face was the last thing she saw before she died. He gave me a chance to live. I never knew he kept searching for me. Sandra placed a hand on her shoulder. He found you. Through us. They spent hours talking by the sea. Eleni told them how she started the library with nothing but an old box of donated books and a painted sign of 2 joined hands. She had never known what the symbol meant, only that she felt it carried hope. As the sun set, Keanu stood watching the golden light reflect on the water. Maybe this is what it was always meant to be, he said. A kindness that keeps traveling, never ending, Sandra smiled. A circle without borders. Together they decided to transform the quiet circle into something greater, a network of small, local kindness hubs run by teachers, nurses, veterans, and students around the world. No big names, no credit, only quiet givers. Within a year, the movement spread to over 30 countries. People painted the 2 joined hands symbol on walls, doors, notebooks, and even coffee cups. It became a sign that said, someone cares here. Keanu and Sandra never spoke publicly about it again. They faded back into normal life, content in knowing the world had learned the message without needing their faces attached. Months later, Sandra received one final letter. No return address, just a small golden wax seal. Inside was a photo, Keanu sitting under a tree with a group of children reading stories. On the back, a short handwritten note. The quiet circle lives wherever love refuses to end. Sandra smiled as she folded the photo gently. She whispered, we kept our promise. And for the first time in years, both of them felt complete. Not because the world had seen their kindness, but because the world had become it. The circle that began in silence had returned to silence. Stronger, purer, eternal. Somewhere in Greece, the children painted a new mural on the library wall. It showed three figures, a man, a woman, and a little girl, holding hands under the sun, forming a perfect circle. Beneath it, in small letters, they wrote, "Kindness never dies. It only finds new hearts." As the wind carried their laughter across the sea, the world, for once, felt healed.